Hello everyone, my name is Isabel. I am a human physiology student in the Sargent College of Health and Rehabilitation Sciences, and I'm going to be sharing my project, Transgender Healthcare, Addressing Transphobia in the Medical School Classroom. The goal of this project is to think about how we can better educate future physicians on trans health issues. So before I get into the presentation, I want to take a second to discuss some vocabulary, the first of which you already heard me use. So transgender or trans is used to refer to someone whose gender identity doesn't align with their biological sex, also called sex assigned at birth. Transgender tends to be the word that you'll see used in a medical setting, so when you're looking at research papers, trans is going to be the word that you hear in the day-to-day. Cisgender or cis is the opposite of trans, so a person whose gender identity does align with their biological sex. Now let's look at some background statistics regarding trans populations in the United States. This is from 2016, and at that time, about 0.6% of the US population identified as trans. That makes about 1.4 million adults. Of that 1.4 million, about 2/3 had undergone gender-affirming hormone therapy. This includes exogenous hormones like testosterone or estrogen, as well as hormone blockers like anti-androgens. Another third have undergone some kind of gender-affirming surgery. Typically, we think of these as phalloplasty or vaginoplasty, but it can actually include a variety of plastic surgeries as well. And even though it may look on the surface like trans individuals, the majority of trans individuals are receiving some kind of gender-affirming care that they need, 50%, so half of all trans individuals, have had to teach their healthcare providers something about their specific health needs. So if we want to look at primary and emergency care, we see the effects of the hate and vitriol that has been directed towards the trans community. 28% of trans individuals postponed or avoided medical treatment, and 33%, a third of trans individuals, delayed or did not try to get preventative health care. These numbers are even more worrying when you consider how many of these individuals may have poor future health outcomes because of this avoidance. The stomach pain that a trans person decides to ignore today could be the beginning signs of cancer that could have been easily treated, but they are choosing to avoid it due to fear of discrimination by others or by their providers. These statistics show us that there is some kind of gap in how physicians are providing care to trans patients and the kind of care that trans patients actually need from those physicians. So to fix this, we need to look at how we're actually educating our future doctors. So for those of you who aren't aware, medical school consists of two-year segments. The first 2 years you spend doing preclinical education, very similar to the undergraduate courses we have now, classroom learning. The next 2 you spend doing a clerkship, also called a clinical rotation, where you're actually in the hospital. And then once you graduate, you can go into a residency to specialize. It's important to know that not all doctors are going to need the same highly specialized trans care. Obviously, an OBGYN, you would want to know a lot more than a hand surgeon, but because of the ubiquity of trans individuals, it is almost certain that any physician will deal with a trans person as a patient in their life. So you would hope that there is some kind of standard that we're teaching them. Unfortunately, a study in 2010 that was published in the Journal of the American Medical Association found that medical students, on average in the US and Canada, received 5 hours only of LGBTQ+ training. This is not enough time for LGBTQ issues as a whole, and it certainly doesn't give the care and attention to each individual category that they actually deserve. So to combat this problem, I wanted to look at how we teach these physicians and how we can change our education system. So to start this, I looked at different curriculum, different course offerings, and electives that medical schools had posted on their websites, and decided on a list of topics where I thought trans healthcare was relevant and important. Then I spent some time researching and collecting articles to use to create learning objectives for what I ended up calling integrations. Medical school's hard. It takes a lot of time already, and we don't have the space necessarily at this point to require a class on trans health for all individuals. So the idea was, instead of creating an elective that not everyone would take or want to take, to create integrations that would go into all classes. So I left these purposefully vague because the idea is that the professor can take the information, read up on it themselves, and apply it to their classroom and their learning style in a way that was relevant. So here's an example that I created of an old learning objectives and then new learning objectives for a cardiovascular class. So a lot of research has shown in the past decades that there is a crucial relationship between sex assigned at birth and cardiovascular health outcomes. We believe that this is related in some way to the hormones in a person's body. So the idea of this new learning objective would be to include understanding how those exogenous hormones will impact someone's health and how that use may affect their health outcomes. This information is new, which is why it's not currently included in the standard curriculums. It's only about 5 or 6 years old that you can find articles talking about these cardiovascular health outcomes in trans people. But by including this, we're not only teaching future physicians to care about trans health, we are also teaching them medical literacy and to keep up with this information as we continue to learn more so that they can better treat these trans populations. So after I created a couple of these curriculums, I needed to figure out what I wanted to actually do with them. I settled on creating a website where I explained my project and posted the curriculums that I created. What I realized when I was compiling this website was I was having to cite 5, 10 sources, many of which were locked behind paywalls that not everyone would be able to read. And when I realized this, I decided to shift the focus of my website from being purely educational for future doctors and current doctors and change it to be accessible to a layperson. So currently the website has some information on the history of endocrinology and trans health. It also includes current programs in the US that focus on trans health and the statistics that I shared with you earlier today. And it does still include that transgender teaching, transgender health curriculum portion. I also included a part of the website where there are resources to educating yourself in other ways, different organizations that do trainings and things like that, as well as linking advocacy groups, which are most times trans run, to introduce those trans voices into my website. Currently, this website is a constant work in progress. Research comes out every day, and I can't keep up with all of it, but the goal is to continue updating this website as I find more and to continue including resources that I think would be helpful for individuals wanting to learn more about trans health. That is my presentation. I am now able to take any questions that you may have.
Questions?
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit more about how you went about finding the existing curricula from medical schools? Can you talk about the research process a little bit of finding what's currently exists in the curricula?
Yeah, some medical school websites are a lot more open than others. Some will include here's every course that you're going to take throughout these 2 years. Here's every rotation you're going to do. Some are a lot harder. I actually did talk to 2 medical students who were nice enough to share their experiences with me, and one of which actually sent me a couple of syllabi from her courses that she had taken and different panels she had been to. But the process was really looking for which schools do have LGBTQ programs and looking at those, which unfortunately even the schools that didn't really talk about what was in the programs. They just said that they had them. And then looking at programs that don't have them and trying to find the classes that seem to be in every medical school.
Did you notice any kind of variation across medical schools and how they cover these kinds of topics, or if there were certain schools that may have had a more dedicated program?
Yeah, I actually was expecting, in my own biases, I guess, that schools in this area would probably have a lot more programs, but I actually found that one of the pilot programs for LGBTQ education was University of Louisville in Kentucky, which was pretty interesting. So they're actually pretty spread out, but there is definitely a large variety of how much content they're actually teaching. So that study that was done in 2010, there's a current study being done to look at that information again and do the same kind of polling of how much LGBTQ content schools are teaching. But that study, the average was 5, but that meant that there were many schools where the number was 0, and then there were schools where it was 10 or 15 hours. So it's across the board, and from what I could tell, it was not regionally dependent either.
If there's no more questions, we'll wrap up there. Thank you.
Thank you.